All right, and we should be live. Let me know if you can hear me, everyone. Just to make sure, it's been a little bit since I've done a live, so give me a quick shout out to make sure. Actually, I wonder. No, I think it's probably fine. Let me just double check. Make sure this is public. Yeah, okay, it's public. All right, let me know if you can hear me. Who's out there? Say a quick hi before I get started. I think I see some people coming in. Awesome. I'll get us started fully here in a second. Welcome. Happy Friday, everyone. All right, we'll kind of get started here once. Just hopefully everyone's showing up. Cool. Let me know if y'all can hear me or see me. Feel free to say hi in the chat. Yeah, cool. Perfect. We're starting to get some people. Awesome. Well, I will get us started. Oh, sorry. All right, so today we're going to be talking about running a successful data team in 2026. I assume most people know of me or of my background. So my name is Ben Rogajan. A lot of people know me as the Seattle data guy, although I do now live in Denver. Currently, I help companies set up their data strategy, data teams, data infrastructure as a consultant. A lot of people know me online because I put out also a decent amount of videos and other content. So on top of that, my day job is consulting and helping companies set up their infrastructure. All right, so this talk is kind of based on the fact that over the last few years, I actually had a few people kind of tell me this line, and it was something along the lines of, the default state of a lot of data teams is failure. I had heard that a few times and kind of understood the frustration. Like a lot of both business and data leaders kind of felt like they were either put in poor positions or maybe their data team wasn't operating the way that they wanted. I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. I don't really fully necessarily agree with the statement, but I get it, right? Like in a lot of cases, some data teams, I like to say, really aren't set up for success. I also like to say that, in many cases, when people are put into data leadership positions, it's in data IC who may not have that much in terms of, leadership experience, but they're a great IC, so they get put into that position, and that also provides various challenges as well. Just in general, I think sometimes the pressure alone from the business to deliver, to do certain things, to maybe or maybe the business doesn't fully understand what the data team does or how they could do it better, but they're still putting pressure on them to deliver certain projects or certain benefits, all of which they probably struggle to do in whatever timeline they're being forced to do it in. So I think there's a lot of reasons why some people feel like data teams struggle or data teams have a hard time delivering value to the business. So that's one of the main reasons I kind of wanted to put together this talk. Cool. I want to start with also kind of covering a few points of how I've seen data teams fail and where I see a lot of the cracks and issues. These are the main ones that I often see. And as we keep going, we'll talk about some kind of solutions towards some of these. One big thing that I often see is lack of ownership, and lack of ownership can really take on many different forms. In some cases, it's no one owns the pipelines, right? Like especially in data engineering, or no one owns the actual data work. It's kind of done by everyone. But ownership can also be in terms of who's making decisions and who's responsible after someone makes those decisions to then deliver them. There's a really good article. Now I'm forgetting the exact author's name, but it's all about like kind of 6 broken types of ownership. And it really is based on a combination of like responsibility, knowledge, and like who has, who's going to actually be the person who puts it into reality, right? So someone might be responsible for the decision, someone's responsible for making that decision actually happen, and then someone has to have the knowledge of making a good decision. And if you don't have all 3 of those, you have different forms of kind of broken ownership that can occur. But there's also just the, someone's built something, no one owns it, types of problems as data teams kind of grow. I like to say over engineering and wrong sizing is another issue that I often see on both sides, right? In some cases, people look at an article and they see, how Netflix built their data infrastructure and they think, hey, I want to do the same thing that Netflix is doing, or I want to do the same thing that Facebook's doing. But they're running a 3-person data team, and you got to be a little more honest on what you should be engineering. But on the flip side, you can end up with just not building enough, where maybe you do have a large data problem and you need to be building for a much more robust system, but you're wrong sizing it because you're trying to maybe get away with fewer engineers or something of that nature. Another big thing is outputs without outcomes. So this is very common, right? We love building dashboards. We love building output, but it needs to be attached to something. It needs to deliver some value somewhere. You don't want to just be stuck, outputting dashboards for the sake of outputting dashboards or outputting data pipelines for the sake of building data pipelines. There needs to be some reason for building certain things. And so a lot of data teams, I think, get stuck here because, it feels productive. It feels like I'm building 1,000 dashboards. So that's valuable. I liked someone recently posted something where they said, building 1,000 dashboards is easy. Building 6 dashboards is hard. Just to say that like building the 6 right dashboards takes time. Right? It's easy to just build 1,000 random dashboards with enough, time. It's hard to build 6 really good dashboards that actually impact the business. And then the last one that I often see doesn't have to do as much with the data team, but more with the business, which is decision avoidance and like metrics theater. So this is where, maybe you have delivered things that are valuable, but the business kind of just ignores it, right? Or they have their gut decisions that they want to go with. They maybe show the metrics and they're like, oh, the metrics are going up, we're happy. When the metrics are going down, maybe they kind of ignore the outcomes or why certain things are happening. They're kind of like, it's fine, right? Like, well, we're data driven only when we want to be, or only when it tells us what we think should be right. All right, so that's kind of the challenges that I've seen over the last few years. Just wanted to cover like running a data team in 2026. I do think it's, I'm going to actually skip this slide. I'm going to focus on how to flip the script. So when I think of running a successful data team, these are the kind of the different categories or almost different pillars that I really try to focus on as I'm building things out. First, I think a really big key for a lot of data teams, or like when you think about what the data team is trying to do at its core, we're really trying to help improve accessibility to data that's trusted, right? Like that I think is a major thing that we're all trying to do. Whether you're a data engineer who's trying to make the data easier to access for analysts, or you're an analyst who's trying to make that data easier to understand by the business, right? You're at every step, we're trying to make that data one step closer to just easier to understand, right? Like, hey, how do we make this easier to understand for the entire company, right? And so I think accessibility is huge. I think we've come from a time where data was often siloed, but also kind of pushed back, right? Like the people that would have access to it were kind of generally just the technical individuals. It was a limited set of people. And now we're kind of getting to this place where it's like, how do we get the right people, the right data when they need it, and that they can understand it and use it. And then I think that leads to the next point that I often have, which is like adoption. So you can obviously on one side create these systems that people have access to, but now people need to actually adopt them. And so I think adoption is always a huge pillar. Whenever I talk to data teams in terms of what they need to improve, I think adoption always ends up being a major one. As you're kind of building adoption and as people are getting more accustomed to looking at data because they have better access, I think then you start hopefully enabling better decisions and faster decisions where people are like, hey, I'm used to looking at the data. I'm, accustomed, I'm adopted, into looking at this dashboard. Now I'm ready to start making better decisions. So that's, I think, a big part of kind of the goals that you want to have as a data team. So I look at these as like different pillars, essentially. Obviously, creating some sort of measurable business impact, which we'll talk about here in the next few slides. I've got a few examples of that. Also, trust and reliability. You can't just do all of this without making sure that your business trusts what you're doing. And I have a few other points here where I reference like team engagement and happiness. Obviously, you do not want a data team that's maybe getting pushed to deliver for no reason at all. You want them to be engaged with the work, interested, and also happy doing it. Uh, and then kind of some of these bigger goals, I think overall is like strategic credibility. You don't want to just be, I think, for a data team, a order taker, someone that like gets asked to do things but doesn't deliver, like doesn't actually play a strategic role. So I think there's some level of strategic credibility as you're doing all of this that you need to be building. And then also just making decisions easier for the business to make. Again, thinking about like as you build these dashboards, they're easier to access. They're you have your business looking at them more often. Hopefully, they are now becoming more accustomed to making decisions and feeling less like there's like a friction layer in between them and said decision. Cool. Also feel free to ask questions as I go along. Awesome. So just going through a quick example. This was one that I had at this point a few years back. But as I was thinking about projects and data teams that I've both helped turn around, but also like what specifically helped turn them around throughout the project. This is one that always kind of comes up in my mind again, where we kind of come in, we were taking over after a prior consultant had been trying to deliver a data stack for the last few months. They had kind of a data team. I like to say it was two IT generalists who were limited. It's not to say that they didn't have a skill set, but they were doing their best with what they had. Their tool set was kind of limited in the sense that it was SQL Server and SSIS. Obviously, SQL Server can do a lot. I see plenty of people run with it, but they were just running into limitations in particular because the data was growing so fast. And it was by the end, even like we ended up seeing the data go from just a few multiples of size to like 100 times the size of data because the company was growing so quickly. And so they kind of had this legacy setup that wasn't keeping up anymore as the data was just growing so much faster. And no one kind of even knew that the data existed. So I think there was a lot of issues. Like you had issues where, again, there was really no adoption because the data was never there. And because the data was never there, people never really went to it. They didn't really rely on it. There were things that the company wanted to do. But at the end of the day, when they kind of looked at it, they're like, well, the data team's not ready. It's been a few months. We're going to just go do our own thing. And so they kind of kept having this issue where they felt locked out of the data. They felt very limited. They felt like they were constantly having to duct tape. And so the data team was not happy because they were not really able to actually deliver any impact. The business wasn't happy because they were continuing to wait and just see these problems kind of mount up. It's like every time they have a meeting with the data team or the consultants, some issue they'd run into some issue where, again, they'd run out of space or they have very limited access to the information that they could. And again, for me, a really big thing for running a successful data team is making sure people have access, right? It's like people need to have access to the data. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult for them to find it valuable. So as we kind of looked at this, we pinpointed that, a big part of this is that, you're running out of space. Again, you're kind of using these toolings and this approach that your data team doesn't really have time to manage, right? Like for this, there's a lot of custom code that the consultants have built to manage everything. And, once they leave, you're not going to be able to build that or manage that. So let's simplify everything we're doing. We focus on a few critical data sets, and we're like, hey, here's some data sets that we know are super valuable. Here's some of the use cases that we know will be super valuable. Let's stop fighting this legacy infrastructure. Let's build for the future. In this case, let's build for the fact that your data is growing very rapidly. Let's build with tools that can handle ingestion, since you're dealing with terabytes per day. And let's make sure that we optimize for your small team. And so as we kind of built out, I think the tooling matters less in terms of what we picked. We went to the cloud and used some solutions to help us ingest data without having to really add more labor to the team. I think that was a big thing, was like, hey, we want this data team that you do have to be focused on connecting with the business So we built pipelines and tooling to manage that, to help them focus less on that and becoming a DBA and more on actually delivering value. And kind of at the end state of all of this is we've simplified their data infrastructure, focused on a few key data sets. The end result was, one, again, they're spending less time on technology and spending more time on with the business. Two, the business started coming to the data team more. I think this is a big thing, as the data became more accessible and we gave them tools, we give the business tools to actually access the data, right? On that flip side, suddenly now the business actually wants to interact with the data team. In fact, at that point, I like to say this is a great problem to have, but it's the next problem you get, which is as you make the data more accessible, now you have to start figuring out what you're going to say no to and what you're going to say yes to. Because in the past, no one's asking you for anything, so nothing to say no to. But now, because everyone wants everything, everyone wants new data ingested, everyone wants new use cases, you now have to be very picky and be strategic on what you focus on. So now it became more of a question of, hey, let's figure out what to say no to. But really, it all started with us understanding, like, hey, the business doesn't even have access to this data. You're getting stuck. Your data team is very small. You're not going to grow it anytime soon. And again, because they're more IT generalists, they're also doing other work as well. Like, they do not have time to sit here and manage, full data stack all the time. So we need to build something that can manage itself more, and so that it can focus on helping the business. So I think those are some key things. And thinking back to like my points here, it really to me was about a combination of like improving accessibility, and it actually allowing the business to feel like they could come and trust the data. And in this sense, the trusting data was very much about making sure that the data actually landed, right? Because in the past, the business was like, well, there's no point in going to our currently data warehouse because the data is not even going to be up to date. It's going to be broken, and we don't really want to deal with that. So a combination of making that both of those things happen, I think, was very important. All right. I think kind of on this, one thing that I've noticed with data teams, like after you build your infrastructure, maybe even after you finish your analysis, is you kind of end your project mentally, right? And I like to say that where the data teams feels their project ends is often where the business begins, or the value for the business begins, right? If you deliver a dashboard, that's really not the end of a project. That's really kind of the beginning of the business now figuring out what this actually means. Like, what should we be doing? Should we be doing anything? Is there anything of value? Don't get me wrong. There are some projects that are just automated quarterly reporting that someone wants to be able to read out and hopefully they make decisions on, but sometimes it's just there for standard reporting. But there are a lot of other projects that have high value that I think often get forgotten because, there was a lot of rah around it initially, but as time went on, maybe people forgot why it was important in the first place. That's what I like to think about the data value chain, and I'll share this on the data leaders playbook. So because I know this is a little bit of a beefy slide, I just like the idea of the data value chain because it helps you sometimes figure out where things are breaking, and I think that's kind of the important part of this. So thinking through how data gets turned into value at the business, I think is very important. So usually I think most data teams end here around maybe share, right? You've delivered your dashboard, that's the end. But you've kind of gone through this whole process. If we look at the prior example for, we talked about the fact that, on the collection or ingestion phase, there was a problem, right? So you can kind of highlight where problems are at that your value chain here is breaking. So that makes it easier to start to fix. So I think part of this and having words to various steps here that's helpful as you're going through is if you feel like your data team is not being run well, you can hopefully figure out where, right? So if you're like, hey, we do a great job analyzing data, we do a great job releasing and sharing, but then nothing happens, then you kind of know, okay, well, what are you doing on the side of like connecting and like meeting with people after and setting up, follow-ups? Are you doing anything to incentivize people to want to look at that data? Are they incentivized? Do they have a benefit for looking at this? What are you doing on the influence side? And then kind of use, change, and reuse. I think it just helps you figure out where things are broken. So I think that's why I like the idea of this. I've given a few examples of both things that can go wrong, but also things that kind of go right at each of these steps. For example, I gave this one dashboards load fast enough to actually be used in meetings. That's huge, right? Like that seems small, but I'd say I've seen a lot of cases where I actually had a client that we just had this where they were referencing the fact that the salespeople, in this case, they were actually using the dashboards to sell. The salespeople would have to like preload dashboards because they would be embarrassed to kind of show the current speed of basically these toolings that they'd built. Otherwise, they're like, well, we have to like have it preloaded. Otherwise, people will know it takes a minute to load this information. And so all these small little things as you're going through are important as you're trying to kind of build your data team. And I think the other important thing to note as you're doing this is that these different sections might, at certain companies, if you're a 2-person data team, you are all of these sections, right? You're going to be the collection, the publication, etc. If you are at a larger company, probably each of these sections is like a team to a degree, right? You might have your data engineering team that kind of does this first part. You might have your analytics engineers and analysts do the second part. Here on the uptake, maybe it's some sort of analyst, maybe it's a kind of business partners team that partners with the data to make it useful and so on. But again, that just like understanding these different sections, I think makes it easier to understand when things are broken because you can start to point out, hey, here's where I think things are broken in what section and how can we improve it. And so I think putting words to ideas just really help you as you're trying to go through and figure out what's the next thing to fix, right? Again, going back to that example, our example was like, oh, well, we had this collection issue. And because we had a data collection issue, that really was just the bottleneck for everything else because we can't get the data reliably into a place that people can access. No one's analyzing it. So it doesn't even matter. We have to fix that problem first. And then you can kind of highlight the other ones as you keep going along. Cool. And also feel free to ask questions as I'm going. I'll look back here in a second. Just to give a few examples as I was going through on where I've maybe improved these steps in the past. One, I think I already gave this example, but I've seen plenty of versions of this. One is just improving the ingestion process because that's the bottleneck, right? Like pulling data sources took too long. Adding new data sources maybe takes too long, right? Like if it takes 2 months for you to add a new data source, people are going to be very frustrated and you have to and they'll probably go and do something themselves. Another one was like simplified the technical foundation to reduce cost, overhead, and onboarding. This was a case where people had like Snowflake and Databricks and like a dozen other tools. And we're like, hey, we need to like really reduce this because every time we have to hire a new data engineer, it takes forever. Like when we had to onboard for this client in particular, it took us a while. We're like, we have to like onboard to like 7 different tools. I have to talk to 10 different people because not everyone even has a full picture of what's going on because there's all these different toolings and all these different teams and you're not that large of a company and we could simplify this and that will make everything easier, not just costs, but also just, again, how much people are having to manage, right? How much your data engineers are having to manage, how long it takes to hire a new employee and get them up to speed and adding value. All those little things plays a role in how successful your data team is. Same thing on the publication side. So on the sharing, I put in remodeled data to allow a broader set of users to access it. Again, I think accessibility is a huge thing. It's always a thing that I'm focused on is how do we make sure that the right audience can use this information for whatever it might be, whether that's, again, a data engineer preparing things for data analysts or data analysts preparing it for their upstream users. I think it's really important to think through like how each of those next users will use it. So we remodeled the data because it had way too many keys. It had there were not duplicate keys, but like you could use multiple different keys to join to different tables. It was very confusing. So we simplified that. We removed a few other kind of complicated things that were just captured in the data, but not modeled in such a way that was easy for analysts to work with. And I also put in here like improved and standardized analytics processes to help reduce decision friction. And so this was a lot around, having an analyst team kind of set standards for what delivering an analysis looks like. Because their business was like, great, we have this analysis, but we don't actually know what we should be doing with it. And so helping that analytics team kind of come up with a more kind of clear path for, hey, here's how we're going to deliver an analysis. Here's how we make sure that the business is with us and understands everything and doesn't feel like they're being left behind. And then I've got a few more examples here. And really, again, I think you can probably look at them in the future. I don't want to just have all the words, but I think thinking through each of these steps lets you make it clearer on where you can possibly improve each kind of little step as you go along. I'm gonna look at some questions real quick. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. One people said, good example. I noticed that some companies are drowning in data and playing catch up to have impactful data. Makes sense. Business. Yep. Let's see. Our intake process is our large bottleneck. It's owned by another group, and it's and is not appropriate for what we need. Yeah, I think it's always very frustrating. I've had a few cases like this where, especially when you're the analytics team or the analytics engineering team, you're stuck with whoever the data engineering team is or whatever they're deciding to do. And sometimes are, I've seen in some cases actually that like the data engineering team is slow because they want to build everything custom. And because of that, every new build or every new ingestion of a new data set takes like 2 months, right? Because one, they're already behind and now you got to add more. And, I do think there's this good balance of trying to figure out, hey, what do we actually need? Again, what are we actually trying to build? What's actually worth investing in? And where are we losing time? Again, so I think you can go through there and be like, use this as an example and go through and be like, hey business, right? Like I can't do, these steps, which we need because someone on step collect or on that uptake or not uptake, sorry, uptakes for ingestion or not for ingestion, for actually connecting. So somewhere in the ingestion and collection step, we're just delayed. Like this is so poorly bottlenecked. Just think about this as as an assembly line. We're so badly bottlenecked that like I'll never get you what you want, right? Unless we fix this. So then the solution either becomes, let's go to the data engineering team and let's get them fix this. Or the other thing that happens in a lot of companies is like, forget the data engineering team, right? We'll do it ourselves. We'll set up our own solution. This happens at so many companies. It leads to other problems, right? Then this is where like data governance and other teams come into play as well. But at the same time, if the business needs to get things done and they feel like it's going to take 6 months to do something that they feel needs to get done now, it's going to get done one way or the other. So if you put a rock in the way of a stream, it will go around it. It's the way I feel. All right, so how to succeed. This is kind of a good, I think, visualization, but like just trying to translate this into more concrete steps. Just some easy breakdown that I have. As your data team, again, I think one of the challenges is, I'm just gonna go back a little bit. One of the challenges is, again, each of these can be their own data teams or sections of a data team: collection, publication, uptake, etc. And so you all have different goals. Just thinking about how you can do your job the best, I break this down into just strategy, execution, adoption, and feedback. That's kind of the key steps. Obviously, around that, you have things like you want to make sure your team is happy. I referenced a lot of this in the slides before, but it really is about answering first what outcomes matter and why. So that's kind of your strategy. What are you actually trying to drive? What do you think the business should be focusing on and why? How do you actually execute? How do you reliably make sure you get the data to go from end to end? That kind of goes back to the like, do you need to fix your ingestion that you've built because it's too slow? Because that is execution, right? Like we need to be better at executing while our data is not landing on time. Okay, we need to execute that better. That is an example of poor execution if it's not landing on time. Even if the data is right? Like, 'cause if the data is right, but it's landing 3 days late and it's not helpful for the business, your data is wrong. Is a good way of thinking about it. And obviously, it doesn't end there, right? Like maybe you're working on the right things, maybe you're executing reliably, but if people don't see it, right? If the tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, right? It doesn't matter. So you do need to make sure that there's adoption. I recently made, I think it was a newsletter, more for my private newsletter, and it was I labeled it something like the A in data stands for adoption. And I was having a conversation with the data leader, and that was a really big point that they brought home was that without adoption, it really doesn't matter, right? You have to kind of build with adoption in mind. And then as you're doing that, make sure you have some sort of feedback loop. So how can you make the next bet better? How can you improve what you've already built? Have that opportunity for feedback. I think I see a question. A lot of systems are built on bandages solutions which impact downstream data. It makes it difficult for data teams to do analysis effectively. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if you're referring to the actual data source systems, because sometimes that's a big problem where the data source system is kind of not that great. But if you're referring to the data team or the data infrastructure, right, then the question becomes: are there things you can fix today to make that less of a bandage solution in the future? But obviously, there's always something somewhere where you're like having to kind of patch up some solution and just deal with what you can. As you're trying to build a strategy, I do think it's important to think about who your team is, and what its high level goal is. I really like this slide, or this picture from Team Topologies. It's a great book. Uh, I don't think every team necessarily fits into these uh, like concepts perfectly, or these team types perfectly. But I think understanding that your team might play a specific role in the larger company, kind of going back to that like different steps in the data value chain, helps you understand kind of what you should be doing better, right? Like what is your job as a team really at the end of the day? If again if you're the data engineering team and your data is landing, it's too slow, or the data is big and it doesn't land in a timely fashion, right? Well, your goal, to do the best job you can, and kind of the goal and strategy for your team is to deliver data to the data analysts in a timely manner. And if you're failing that, then you have a clear thing to fix, right? It's very clear, like, hey, our data team is not, or our data engineering team is not maybe focused specifically, especially at this point, on building tooling from scratch, or it's not focused on delivering analysis. It needs to get data here on time. So how do we fix this problem? And that makes it clear on kind of what you should be delivering, and how you should operate. Uh, and I use this example because for some companies, your data team is a data team of two and you do everything. For other companies, your data team is several layers removed from the actual business, but it doesn't mean it's not driving value. I think it's still important that you make it clear on how you're driving value, and making data easy to access, making data reliable. Those are all key, crucial things that I think is worth focusing on and referencing. And then I also put in here limit focus to a small number of strategic bets. So don't get pulled into 100 things. Focus on the 2 or 3 things this year that will actually drive value. Cool. Let me know if anyone has any questions. Now, just some quick tactics. We've kind of talked maybe more about like setting up a strategy, having this approach where you have a clear strategy, execution, adoption, etc. But obviously, everyone likes some idea of like, well, what does that look like? What can I actually do? One, I always like to say no more often. Now, I don't mean just say no. Whenever I say this, I mean you have to provide a reason. There's always a why part of this. So one, you got to be able to explain trade-offs in plain business terms, right? Like, hey, you're asking me to do this next thing. I have these 10 other projects that I need to do, or maybe this thing you're asking me to do has this much risk or it's this much cost. Do you still want to do it, right? Making sure you have a clear understanding of what can happen, what can't, and why. And decline work that maybe doesn't tie to a decision or a metric. I think is always good, where it's like, hey, clearly, or right now our team is focused on maybe, again, improving our ability to ingest data. Or maybe our team is focused on delivering the specific model. We can't take this on, especially since right now, it seems like this is more, this isn't focused on a specific business goal that we have right now. So I think that kind of leads to the next point, which is always try to anchor work to business outcomes. So your goal is to try to tie things to some sort of measurable outcome at the end of the day. There's not always a perfect outcome, right? You kind of have to sometimes estimate like what's the value of maybe delivering a certain model, or what's the value of remodeling your data. Sometimes there's value in that. For example, I used that earlier where I talked about remodeling data, and the value there was the fact that when we remodeled the data, suddenly we increased the number of users that could actually access the data, understand the data. We were seeing increased usage. We had less questions come across. And so you're reducing the amount of weight on the data teams who are having to support that data, and you're increasing the output from the analysts, which you can add some sort of maybe some ROI if you'd like on the other side of that, based on, well, how much is a certain analyst worth? What are they delivering, et cetera. And so trying to figure out clear business outcomes, I think, is always key. On that, I like to say build fewer things, but finish them fully. Ship end to end. So that means don't just deliver a pipeline and then a model, right? Like make sure you're then pushing to be like, hey, is this getting used? How's it getting used? Can we make it better? I don't think just delivering a dashboard is kind of the end state. I think adoption is the goal we're really going for, not delivery. And so that's the way I like to think about it: is that we're going for adoption and not delivery. And then, like, say, own the why and not just the how. Like, there is some onus on us as data teams to have some goal to push for that why, right? Like, we want to be able to say, hey, why are we designing the solution? Obviously, you're not always going to get a perfect answer. And sometimes you're still going to get pushback. Even if you ask why, sometimes you might still get pushed into doing things. But hopefully, you start forcing the business to start translating things into business intent and not just into, hey, we want AI. And it's like, well, what is the actual thing we're trying to drive with AI? Are we trying to increase customer satisfaction? Okay. If we're trying to increase customer satisfaction, what about it? And you can start going down that route. This holds everyone to just a higher level of accountability, and you're not just focused on execution. Cool. That is my focus for today. I didn't want to talk too long, but if you have questions, let me know. And thanks for everyone who attended. All right. Well, I don't see any questions. Let me know if anyone has any. Hopefully everyone's starting off the year well. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. If not, I will head off and I will see you all in the next one. All right. Well, thank y'all.